The guard waved her aside with the same careless motion used for flies. "Maintenance later," he muttered, not bothering to look at her face. Clara Jensen stood in the sterile hallway with her mop pressing into her palm. The door he guarded led to Suite 12, where Raymond Ashford, the most powerful real estate magnate in the state, lay surrounded by machines that hissed and beeped like reluctant witnesses. The guard's words carried no insult, but something colder. He spoke as if she were invisible, as if uniforms erased the human beneath them. Bleach hung in the air, sharp enough to burn the back of her throat. The tile beneath her shoes smelled faintly of metal, like pennies rubbed raw. From inside the suite, the pattern of a monitor quickened, then stuttered. Clara shifted her weight, the rubber soles of her shoes whispering against the floor. She stayed silent. Silence was armor, though it cut from the inside. Dr. Everett Monroe's baritone carried through the cracked door. "We are losing ground! The cascade is accelerating! Neurological collapse is close!" Clara lowered her gaze as the door closed in her face. For an instant, she caught the gray figure on the bed. Raymond Ashford, eyes closed, skin drained of power and fortune. He looked smaller than the photographs that once filled magazines. She pushed her cart down the side corridor. The squeak of one uneven wheel made her presence obvious, yet her existence remained unseen. Her body performed its duties, but her mind refused to stay idle. The strange odor that never vanished, no matter how thoroughly she scrubbed. The dull crescents of Ashford's nails. The subdued arguments she overheard when doctors thought walls could shield them. She remembered listening differently once, in lecture halls instead of hospital corridors. Glassware clinked, Bunsen flames whispered. Professors warned that the body always whispered before it screamed. Those days ended when her father's stroke pulled her from scholarship into survival. She folded away her white coat, traded lab benches for mop buckets, and carried that unfinished knowledge like a weight she could never set down. The hallway lights flickered, buzzing faintly. Voices carried again through the wall. "It is not autoimmune," said a younger man, urgency tightening his words. "The progression is too deliberate." "Then stop chasing shadows," Dr. Monroe snapped back. "This is medicine, not folklore." Clara leaned closer, her hand pressing against the plaster. Deliberate. That was the word she had been afraid to form. Ashford's decline was not random, not chaotic. It moved in sequence, like an equation unspooling step by step. Her pulse quickened, beating harder than the rattle of her cart as she resumed her route. She wiped door handles and collected trash with practiced precision, but her eyes hunted patterns others discarded. The visitor log taped at the nurse's desk repeated a single name, written in looping, elegant ink. A black jar had been left on Ashford's nightstand 2 nights ago, its foreign label glossy beneath the lights. She had noted its position carefully. Tonight it had shifted, just enough to prove it had been handled. Her shift ended after midnight. The locker room smelled of detergent and fatigue. In the mirror, Clara studied the reflection that others ignored. Hair bound too tightly, uniform plain, eyes sharp with exhaustion and something stronger, a certainty that frightened her more than doubt ever had. Behind her, younger staff laughed freely, their voices dismissing her without words. She pulled her bag over her shoulder and walked past them into the parking lot. Sodium lights glared above, buzzing with static, throwing fractured shadows across the asphalt. She stopped at her car. The night smelled of wet concrete, exhaust, and faintly of the same metallic trace she had caught in Suite 12. She shut her eyes. The image of Ashford's nails burned in her memory. The shifting jar. The odor that clung even after bleach. Her chest tightened. Patterns were not shadows. They were evidence. And they were killing him. Clara lowered herself into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. For a long moment, she did not start the car. She listened to the silence pressing around her. Then she whispered into the still air, words meant only for herself. They will never see me, but I see them. I see everything! The ignition clicked. The engine growled. She stared through the windshield at the road cutting into the dark. She could return tomorrow and scrub surfaces as she had for years. She could remain unseen. But something inside her refused to bend. The memory of her father in a wheelchair, staring at bills piled high. The memory of the textbook she had left unopened when she dropped out. The memory of a lecture once given about poisons designed to vanish inside the body, leaving only patterns for those who knew where to look. The hospital had dismissed her again, but truth had already chosen her. Raymond Ashford was slipping toward death, and no one in his circle of brilliance saw what was happening. She did. Tomorrow she would not just clean. She would watch. She would gather. She would risk being noticed. Because time was running out. Clara arrived before dawn, the hour when corridors belonged only to machines and the few who served them. She carried her mop, her cart, her badge that labeled her a custodian, yet under her jacket pocket she carried something else. A notebook, lined pages filled with fragments she had pieced together in stolen minutes, dates of symptoms, changes in Ashford's condition, shifts in the jar's position. Notes written in the smallest of handwriting. The lobby windows glowed pale with first light. A storm had passed overnight, leaving streaks of rain across the glass. The air smelled of ozone, damp paper, and the faint aroma of coffee drifting from a distant lounge. Clara moved silently, her wheels squeaking as if announcing her presence to a world that refused to listen. Outside Suite 12, Officer Keene stood tall, his expression unreadable. He gave her the same flat glance as the night before. "Quick in and out," he said. "The doctors are on their way." She nodded. Words wasted themselves on men like him. She entered the room, the door clicking softly behind her. Raymond Ashford lay motionless, face pale, lips tinged with gray. The machines surrounding him hummed and beeped with restless energy, each screen filled with numbers only doctors could decipher. To Clara, what mattered was not the numbers, but the body. The half-moons of his nails now nearly vanished. His hair, once thick, had thinned further in irregular patches. His skin, dry and irritated, bore faint redness around his wrists where lotion had been applied. Her eyes traveled to the nightstand. The black jar sat there again, glossy, immaculate, too perfectly placed. She drew closer, pretending to dust the table. The faint metallic tang lingered, masked by perfume but not erased. She dipped the cloth to the surface, subtle enough to catch a trace. Her mind whispered confirmation. Footsteps entered behind her. Dr. Everett Monroe swept in, his white coat crisp, his hair silver, his presence commanding. He spoke without glancing her way. "We are past conventional diagnostics. Prepare another series of tests. We must widen our search." Clara lowered her gaze, cloth in hand, but her ears strained. A younger voice, tentative yet insistent, answered him. "Dr. Monroe, the sequence of symptoms, peripheral neuropathy, alopecia, abdominal distress, it is too exact to be coincidence. I suspect an external toxin." Dr. Monroe's tone sliced through the air. "Dr. Chen, enough. We do not waste time chasing theories from textbooks. Focus on reality." The younger man, Dr. Lyle Chen, fell silent. Clara saw his shoulders tighten as he scribbled something into his chart. The exchange burned inside her chest. She wanted to step forward, to lend her voice to his, but her uniform chained her. She finished her routine, slid the cloth back into her cart, and left quietly. By noon, rain had returned, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Clara sat in the staff lounge alone, the faint hum of a vending machine filling the silence. She opened her notebook, studying her notes again. The progression was clear. The more Ashford's hands glistened with the cream, the worse he became. The logic was undeniable, but logic without authority was silence. Her mind wandered to the textbooks she kept at home, stacked beside her children's schoolwork. Heavy metals. She remembered the words of her professor long ago. Colorless, odorless, absorbed through skin. The perfect slow weapon. She traced the memory with her finger on the paper, pressing hard enough to leave a dent. That evening, she adjusted her schedule to pass Suite 12 again. Inside, she overheard the team debating, voices tight with fatigue. Autoimmune cascade still possible, one suggested. Cardiac involvement complicates it, another replied. Dr. Monroe cut them off. Speculation achieves nothing. We continue supportive care. Do not waste resources chasing shadows. Clara backed away before anyone noticed her. She felt her throat burn. Shadows, he had said. But she saw patterns. Patterns as sharp as chemical equations. Her chance came near midnight. A nurse left the room momentarily to fetch supplies. The guard stepped aside to flirt with a receptionist. Clara slipped in with her cart, silent as breath. She moved to the bathroom counter where Ashford's personal items gleamed under soft lights. The jar sat waiting. She twisted the lid carefully, dipped a cotton swab into the cream, then sealed it again. The swab vanished into a small plastic vial hidden in her pocket. The monitor behind her beeped erratically. Ashford stirred, eyes fluttering half open, his lips parting to form a soundless word. Clara froze, the vial clenched tight. For a moment his gaze met hers, unfocused, weak, but lingering, as if he recognized in her something the others had missed. Then his eyes rolled back, and the machine steadied into its frantic rhythm. She slipped out before the nurse returned, heart pounding in her throat. Later, in the dim light of the janitorial closet, Clara assembled her tools: baking soda, aluminum foil, a plastic beaker borrowed from the cafeteria, cleaning solutions reimagined as reagents. Her hands moved with precision remembered from another life. The mixture fizzed softly, releasing a faint odor that clung to her hair. She dipped the swab into the solution, waited, and watched. The liquid shifted color, pale at first, then unmistakably darker, a hue she remembered from her professor's demonstration years ago. Her stomach clenched. The test was crude, far from laboratory standards, but the evidence spoke with ruthless clarity. Thallium. The name pulsed in her mind like a bell tolling, rare, archaic, nearly forgotten in modern practice, but devastating. She leaned back against the wall, breath shaking, the vial trembling in her fingers. 20 specialists surrounded Raymond Ashford. None had seen it, but she had. The closet light flickered, humming in silence. Clara stared at the crude reaction, at the truth she alone carried. Her job, her security, her family's fragile stability, all balanced on the edge of a decision. If she spoke, they would dismiss her. If she stayed silent, a man would die. Her reflection in the closet's narrow mirror caught her eye. A woman in a plain uniform, hair pulled back tight, face pale with fatigue but marked by unyielding eyes, invisible to them, but not to herself. Clara closed the notebook, slid the vial into her pocket, and whispered to the silence. They will hear me, one way or another. The storm outside rattled against the windows as if agreeing. Morning light cut through the hospital windows in fractured slants, striking the polished floor like shards of glass. Clara Jensen pushed her cart down the corridor, her notebook hidden in her apron pocket, the vial buried deeper still. Her hands moved with practiced rhythm, but her mind replayed the reaction she had witnessed in the closet. The liquid's shift in color had seared itself into her thoughts. No denial, no mistake. The poison had a name. She passed nurses bustling with trays, interns trailing behind clipboards, all of them too busy to notice her. That invisibility, once her shield, had become unbearable. Every face turned away, every voice spoke over her, and all the while a man behind closed doors withered beneath their gaze. At the nurses' station, Dr. Everett Monroe strode past, his expression carved in stone, His shoes clicked sharply against the tile, each step a declaration of authority. He glanced once in Clara's direction, eyes sliding across her like she were part of the wall. "Keep the floors clear," he said, not to her, but toward her uniform. Then he was gone. Her jaw tightened. She wanted to shout, to stop him in the hall, to thrust the evidence into his hands. But she remembered his voice, the way he cut down Dr. Chen for daring to suggest an external toxin. To him, her words would be less than meaningless. They would be dangerous. Clara turned her cart deliberately, heading toward the research wing where she knew Dr. Chen often disappeared after rounds. She had studied his face during brief encounters, the hesitation when speaking to Monroe, the spark of curiosity not yet extinguished by hierarchy. If anyone would listen, it was him. She found him bent over a laptop in a small side room, coffee cooling beside him. His eyes lifted, wary as she entered. "I clean here in the afternoons," Clara said, voice even. She set her rag on the counter, then paused. "I know what is killing Raymond Ashford." Dr. Chen blinked, the words hanging in the air like smoke. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His gaze flicked to her badge, then to her face. "That is a strong claim." "I tested his hand cream," she continued, pulling the vial from her pocket with steady hands. "Improvised methods, but accurate enough. It contains thallium. That is why his symptoms progress in such perfect sequence. The more it touches his skin, the faster he declines." He stared at the vial as if it might burn him. His lips parted to speak, but footsteps echoed down the hall. Clara slipped the vial back into her pocket, her heart hammering. A nurse entered with a stack of files, greeting Dr. Chen without acknowledging Clara at all. Clara resumed wiping the counter. Head lowered, silent once more. When the nurse left, Dr. Chen leaned closer. "You should not have tested anything. If anyone finds out, then let them," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with restrained force. "Do you want him to die while they argue theories? Look at the pattern yourself. Neuropathy climbing upward, irregular hair loss, abdominal pain, liver strain. Every page in your textbooks would point to thallium." He rubbed his temple, torn between reason and fear. "Even if you are right, if I present this, they will ask how I know. If I mention you, they will laugh me out of the room." "They will not laugh if he dies," Clara replied, meeting his eyes. Her voice softened, though the fire behind it did not. "You saw it too. You knew something was wrong." Dr. Chen hesitated. His silence was not dismissal this time, but conflict. "Leave the vial with me," he said finally. "I will run a real test in the lab. But you must not speak of this to anyone else. Promise me." Clara handed him the vial, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second. The weight of her decision pressed against her chest. "Do not let them bury this," she said. Then she turned and wheeled her cart out, the hallway swallowing her into its usual invisibility. That night, the storm returned, harder than before. Rain battered the windows, thunder rolled above, and the hospital lights flickered. Clara worked her route quietly, but her mind lived inside the lab, where Dr. Chen might be bent over instruments confirming or denying her truth. Every second stretched long, each echo of thunder a reminder that time was vanishing. At 2 a.m, alarms shrieked from Suite 12. Clara dropped her mop and ran before she realized her feet had moved. Through the open door, she saw chaos. Nurses rushing, machines screaming, Ashford convulsing weakly beneath tangled wires. Dr. Monroe stormed in, commanding orders. "Stabilize him now. We cannot lose this patient tonight." Clara hovered in the doorway, breath sharp, hands trembling. She knew exactly what was happening. The poison had reached deeper, clawing at organs no antidote yet guarded. She wanted to shout the word thallium into the noise, force them to hear her. But fear pinned her tongue. Then, from the back of the room, Dr. Chen's voice broke through. This fits. All of it. Check for heavy metals. Check for thallium specifically. The room fell silent for half a breath, disbelief crackling in the air. Dr. Monroe turned sharply, his glare like a blade. Enough, Dr. Chen. We do not waste critical time on fantasies. But Chen did not retreat. His shoulders squared, his voice firmer. It is not a fantasy. His symptoms align perfectly. I already began a test on a sample from his lotion. Monroe froze. The words hung heavy, the hierarchy trembling. For the first time, Clara saw hesitation flicker in his eyes. The machines wailed louder. Nurses scrambled to adjust medications. Monroe barked new orders, but his authority no longer carried the same weight. The seed had been planted, undeniable, demanding attention. Clara stepped back into the hallway, unseen among the chaos, her heart thundering with both fear and vindication. The truth was no longer hers alone. It had entered the room, carried by a voice that could not be dismissed so easily. She pressed her back to the cool wall, listening as the storm outside slammed against the glass. The future of Raymond Ashford, the future of her own fragile invisibility, now rested on whether Dr. Chen's courage could survive Monroe's wrath. And for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to believe she was no longer entirely alone. The storm lingered into morning. Gray light pressed against the hospital windows like damp cloth. Clara Jensen moved through the corridor with her cart, eyes lowered, though her mind burned with the memory of Dr. Lyle Chen's defiance. For a moment, the chain of command had cracked, and truth had leaked through. Yet the outcome was still uncertain. Authority could smother courage as quickly as poison smothered a body. In Suite 12, silence had replaced the frenzy of the night. Machines whispered steadily, Raymond Ashford's chest rising and falling with fragile rhythm. He looked carved from wax, each breath a negotiation with something unseen. Nurses adjusted his tubes with clinical detachment. Their voices hushed as though volume itself might shatter him. Dr. Everett Monroe entered, shoulders squared, his presence filling the space. "We have stabilized him for now," he declared, tone clipped, leaving no room for dissent. "Additional panels will confirm the next course." His gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Chen. The silence that followed was heavier than any reprimand. Clara dusted the windowsill, invisible as ever. Yet she felt the tension between the men like a wire drawn too tight. Chen kept his head down, but his pen scratched furiously against the chart. Clara's chest ached with the urge to speak, to stand beside him, but her mop handle grounded her to the role they had written for her. Later, in the staff lounge, she found Chen alone, shoulders hunched over his coffee. His eyes darted to the doorway when she entered, then softened slightly. "They dismissed it?" she asked, quietly. He shook his head. "They acknowledged nothing. But the sample I tested is running through the spectrometer now. Results should be clear by evening." His voice dropped lower. "If I am right, Monroe will be forced to confront it." Clara leaned against the wall, her rag clenched in her fist. "And if you are wrong? Then I have destroyed my career," Chen admitted. His hand trembled as he lifted the cup. "But I cannot ignore the evidence. You were right." The words tightened her throat. For years, she had been invisible. Her mind dismissed before her lips even formed a sentence. To hear him say it now, even in secret, felt like a window opening in a long, sealed room. A crash of thunder shook the building. Both turned toward the window, where rain streaked the glass in jagged lines. The afternoon brought another visitor to Suite 12. Officer Keene allowed a man through, tall, expensively dressed, carrying a leather briefcase. Clara recognized him from a photograph once tucked into a business magazine she had swept off a waiting room floor. Victor Dane, Ashford's longtime rival, his partnerships broken in a bitter lawsuit years before. "I came to pay respects," Dane said smoothly, setting the briefcase near the foot of the bed. His eyes lingered on Ashford with a mixture of pity and something colder. Old grudges fade when life hangs by a thread. Dr. Monroe accepted him with a curt nod, uninterested in business rivalries. But Clara, dusting near the corner, felt the chill run down her spine. Dane's hands brushed the nightstand deliberately, lingering near the familiar black jar. Too deliberate, too possessive. Her eyes locked on the object, its glossy surface reflecting the storm outside. She memorized the movement, the placement, the way he adjusted it slightly before withdrawing. Every detail etched into her mind. That night, Clara did not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, her children asleep in the next room, her old textbooks spread before her. The storm rattled the windows, dishes in the sink clinking faintly. She flipped to the chapter on thallium, tracing each symptom with her finger. It was all there: the neuropathy, the alopecia, the gastrointestinal collapse. The slow degradation that mimicked other diseases until it was too late. Her notes grew longer, her handwriting cramped. She sketched timelines, matching Ashford's deterioration with the pattern of visits and the jars that followed. The evidence was no longer fragments. It was a map. By dawn, her eyes burned, but her resolve sharpened. She would not stay silent. At the hospital, Chen intercepted her in the corridor, his expression tight. The results came back. Confirmed. His voice shook. Thallium. Elevated levels consistent with chronic exposure. Relief and terror collided inside her. You told them? His jaw clenched. I tried. Monroe shut me down. He said the test was contaminated. He accused me of incompetence. Chen's voice cracked, raw with frustration. He will bury this if he can. Clara's breath caught. To have the truth proven, then denied, was worse than invisibility. It was erasure. That evening, another code blue tore through the corridors. Clara dropped her mop again, heart hammering. She pushed into Suite 12 against protocol, slipping in before Officer Keene could stop her. Ashford convulsed, his monitors screaming, nurses crowding around. Monroe barked orders, his voice iron. But beneath it all, Clara saw the jar gleaming on the nightstand, positioned front and center, as if daring someone to notice. Her body moved before her mind decided. She snatched the jar, holding it high. "This is killing him!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The room froze. Nurses stared. Monroe's face blanched with fury. "Get her out!" he roared. Officer Keene lunged forward, but Chen's voice cracked like a whip. "She is right. The lab confirmed it." His hand pointed directly at the jar. "That cream is the delivery system. Every symptom matches. Every test proves it." The silence that followed felt endless. Then a nurse whispered, "It explains everything." Another nodded, eyes wide. The tide had shifted. Monroe's authority wavered, his command unraveling. He reached for the jar, but Clara stepped back, clutching it to her chest. For the first time, every eye in the room was on her, not as a custodian, but as the person who had seen what no one else dared. The storm outside cracked with thunder, rattling the glass as if punctuating the moment. Ashford gasped for breath, monitors shrieking. The decision hung in the air like lightning waiting to strike. And Clara Jensen, once invisible, stood at the center, holding the truth in her hands. The jar trembled in Clara Jensen's hands as if it carried its own pulse. Around her the air thickened, the storm's percussion against the windows echoing the chaos within. Raymond Ashford's monitors screamed, nurses froze between duty and doubt, and Dr. Everett Monroe's command voice faltered in the face of open defiance. "Give me that," Monroe demanded, his hand extended, authority straining to reassert itself. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his jaw locked tight, but for the first time his eyes betrayed fear. Clara clutched the jar tighter. This is what is killing him. Her voice carried a steadiness she had not felt since she left her textbooks behind years ago. She stood rooted, a mop bucket at her feet, but no one mistook her for the help now. Dr. Lyle Chen stepped forward, his lab coat wrinkled, his face flushed with the risk he was taking. "I ran the tests," he said loudly enough for every nurse and intern to hear. "The cream contains thallium. The levels in Mr. Ashford's blood confirm chronic exposure." Gasps rustled through the staff. One nurse whispered, "That explains the hair loss, the neuropathy." Another nodded, her eyes wide. The air shifted, authority tipping toward truth. Monroe's voice lashed out, brittle. "You compromised the chain of evidence. Your sample was tainted by unauthorized handling. This woman is not a doctor. She is a cleaner. Nothing she says bears weight in this room." But his words fell flat. The image of Clara standing firm, the jar clutched to her chest, was stronger than his title. The silence of the staff spoke louder than obedience. Officer Keene stepped inside, drawn by the raised voices. His hand hovered near his belt, his posture stiff. "Is there a problem here?" Monroe seized the chance. "Remove her immediately. She has interfered with critical care." Chen's voice cracked across the room. "If you remove her, you remove the truth, and Ashford will die." His words burned, louder than he had ever dared to speak before. All eyes turned to Ashford. His chest heaved, the monitor's shrill tone pulling them back to the brink. The patient, the billionaire, the man who had filled magazines with his empire, lay at the mercy of silence or courage. A nurse broke first. "We need toxicology to confirm now. No more delays." Another added, "If it is thallium, the antidote exists. Prussian blue can bind it. We can still save him." The tide had turned. Monroe's voice sharpened into a desperate edge. "You do not act without my orders." But it was too late. The jar left Clara's hands, passed to Chen with deliberate care. He held it like evidence, raising it for all to see. "This is not speculation. This is proof." For a moment, Monroe stood frozen, a man watching his authority slip like sand through clenched fists. His silence condemned him more than any admission. The team moved. Orders snapped through the room, new blood draws, samples rushed to toxicology, calls placed to the pharmacy for Prussian blue. Nurses swarmed with renewed purpose, their hesitation dissolving. The sound of motion replaced the paralysis, and Ashford's monitors steadied into fragile rhythm. Clara stepped back, her body trembling now that the moment had passed. She pressed her palm against the wall, grounding herself against the dizzying reality. For years she had been invisible. Now every eye in the room knew she existed. Monroe exhaled sharply, his shoulders rigid. He adjusted his coat, gathered the fragments of his authority, and turned to Chen. "If your claims prove false, your career ends tonight." Chen met his gaze without flinching. "And if they prove true, your refusal to act will be remembered." The silence that followed cracked louder than thunder. Clara slipped into the hallway, her knees weak. She leaned against the cool plaster, drawing in air that smelled of bleach and storm. For the first time in years, her silence had been broken not by dismissal but by necessity. Minutes later, Chen joined her, the jar still in his hand, his expression fierce with exhaustion. "You forced their hand," he said. "They cannot ignore it now." She nodded, unable to find words. The adrenaline that had fueled her had drained, leaving only trembling hands and the faint sting of tears she would not release. Outside the window, lightning split the sky, illuminating the city below. The storm battered the glass with relentless force, but inside the hospital another storm had already begun. Authority crumbling, truth demanding space. Hours passed. Clara continued her rounds in silence, but everywhere she went, whispers followed. "That is her. The cleaner who saw what the doctors missed." Nurses gave her brief nods. Interns glanced at her with quiet awe. Even Officer Keene avoided her eyes, his posture no longer one of dismissal, but caution. By dawn, the toxicology report confirmed everything. Elevated thallium levels consistent with months of exposure. The cream, tested in multiple labs, revealed the toxin embedded in its formula. The proof was undeniable. When Monroe read the results aloud in the conference room, his voice was flat, stripped of triumph. The staff sat in silence, waiting. Finally, Chen spoke. "We administer Prussian blue immediately. He still has a chance." Monroe's lips pressed thin, but he gave the order. It was not concession, but survival. Clara stood outside the room listening, her mop in hand. She had no seat at the table, no voice in the discussion, yet her presence was woven into every decision now. She had forced their eyes open. Later, as the antidote coursed through Ashford's veins, his monitors began to ease. The frantic beeping softened, his body relaxing against the pillows. A nurse whispered, "It is working." Clara lingered in the doorway, unseen but present. She watched the faint color return to his skin, the rise and fall of his chest more even, less labored. Relief flooded her, quiet and profound. Monroe left the room abruptly, his stride clipped. His empire of authority had cracked, though he still carried himself as if the crown remained. Chen caught Clara's eye through the doorway. He gave a slight nod, an unspoken acknowledgement. She returned it, subtle, restrained. Then she turned back to her cart, pushing it down the corridor with the same steady rhythm. The wheel squeaked, as it always had. But now the sound carried differently. Not erasure, not invisibility. A reminder that even the smallest sound could echo when the silence broke. Raymond Ashford was not safe yet. The poison's grip lingered, and shadows still circled his bedside. But the truth had stepped into the light, and Clara Jensen had carried it there with her own hands. The storm had cleared by morning, leaving the city washed in pale sunlight. The hospital corridors, however, still carried the residue of the night before. Whispers trailed Clara Jensen wherever she pushed her cart. Faces that once looked through her now turned, their gazes quick, uncertain, measuring. She kept her head down, moving with her familiar rhythm. Yet inside she felt the weight of something irreversible. In Suite 12, Raymond Ashford's breathing had steadied. The antidote had begun its work, though his recovery remained fragile. Nurses hovered with renewed purpose, adjusting drips, charting progress with careful hope. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with coffee, but gone was the metallic tang that had haunted the room. Clara lingered in the doorway, unseen by most, until Dr. Lyle Chen noticed her. He stepped aside, inviting her closer without a word. She approached the bed cautiously, her eyes tracing Ashford's face. The faintest color had returned to his cheeks. His eyelids fluttered, though his consciousness remained deep. "He is responding," Chen said softly. Slowly, but clearly. Without the antidote, he would not have survived the night. Clara nodded, her throat tight. The truth that had nearly been silenced now pulsed in the steady rhythm of Ashford's heart monitor. Yet relief was tempered by unease. Across the room, Dr. Everett Monroe stood rigid, his arms folded, his expression a mask of professional detachment. He spoke little, delegating to others with clipped commands. His authority, once unquestioned, had thinned, though no one dared confront him openly. His eyes lingered on Chen with quiet fury, then flicked toward Clara as if she were an irritant he could not remove. By noon, the administrators convened an emergency meeting. Clara overheard fragments in the hallway, words like liability, malpractice, negligence. Monroe's voice carried sharp as a blade. "This institution will not be undermined by rumor. We proceed carefully." Chen emerged later, his face pale. "They are circling wagons," he muttered to Clara. "They will protect Monroe, no matter the cost. If the truth about the poisoning becomes public, it exposes all of them. Clara felt the familiar sting of dismissal tightening its grip again. She had forced their eyes open, but now they scrambled to close them. That evening, as she wheeled her cart toward the service elevator, a voice called from the shadows of the lobby. "Miss Jensen!" She turned. Victor Dane stepped forward, polished shoes gleaming, his briefcase tucked neatly at his side. His smile was practiced, his tone smooth. "Word travels quickly. It seems you saved Mr. Ashford's life." Clara stiffened, her hands tightening on the cart handle. "I clean floors." His smile widened. "And yet you saw what no one else did. Remarkable. But dangerous, too. You should be careful about the enemies you make." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" He laughed lightly, shaking his head. "Not at all. I admire you, truly. A woman who sees through shadows deserves respect. But hospitals are political machines. Men like Monroe protect themselves first. If you align with him, you disappear. If you align against him, you burn. Either way, you lose." Clara's silence was her answer. She pushed her cart toward the elevator. Dane's voice followed her, low and deliberate. "Ashford may not realize yet who saved him, but I do. And so do others. Remember that." The elevator doors closed, cutting him off, but his words clung to her like smoke. That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table again, textbooks spread before her, though she could not focus. Her children slept in the next room, their breathing soft through the thin walls. She stared at the notes she had written, the evidence she had gathered, and the image of Dane adjusting the jar burned through her memory. She whispered to the empty kitchen, "They will bury the truth if I let them." Sleep never came. At dawn, she returned to the hospital with renewed resolve. In the staff lounge, she found Chen, exhausted, his tie loosened, his eyes red. "We need to document everything," she said quietly. "The lab results, the timelines, the visitor logs. If they silence us, the truth still needs to stand." Chen hesitated, then nodded. "I will help you. But if they discover us—" "They already see us," Clara interrupted. "And they will not unsee." Together they began to gather fragments. Chen printed copies of the toxicology reports, slipping them into a folder. Clara photographed the visitor logs with her phone, careful to catch Dane's name repeated over weeks. They whispered in corners, their alliance fragile but fierce. By afternoon, Monroe confronted Chen in the hallway. His voice low but venomous. "You have overstepped. One more act of insubordination and you will not practice medicine in this state again." Chen held his ground. "Then so be it. I will not let a man die because of pride." Monroe's eyes narrowed, cold as steel. "You will regret this." Clara watched from around the corner, her fists clenched. The battle was no longer about medicine. It was about power, reputation, control. And in the center of it lay Raymond Ashford, his body still fighting poison, his future tethered to who won this silent war. That evening, Clara slipped once more into Suite 12 while Ashford slept. She stood at his bedside, listening to the machine's hum, watching his chest rise and fall. For the first time, his hand twitched faintly, his fingers curling against the sheet. She reached out, resting her hand lightly against his. His skin was warm, faintly rough, human. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. "You do not know me," she whispered, "but I have carried your life in my hands, and I will not let them take it back." Outside, the corridors echoed with footsteps, voices hushed, power shifting like sand. The hospital had become a battlefield, and Clara Jensen, once invisible, now stood at its center. The storm outside had ended. But the storm inside had only begun. Rain returned overnight, though softer this time, falling like whispers against the hospital windows. Inside, tension pressed harder than the storm. Clara Jensen pushed her cart along the polished corridor, her notebook hidden beneath rags, the folder of evidence tucked deeper still. Whispers still followed her, but now they carried weight. Admiration from some, fear from others, hostility from a few. She felt every glance, every silence sharpened into judgment. In Suite 12, Raymond Ashford stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering, his fingers twitching against the sheets. Nurses noted every detail, marking small victories on charts. The antidote was working, though recovery would be long and fragile. His empire still teetered, his life balanced between what had been stolen and what could still be salvaged. Dr. Everett Monroe entered briskly, his authority forced, but not gone. His voice cut the air. "Rounds begin at noon. No deviations." He ignored Clara, though his eyes brushed her briefly, a flicker of recognition he could not erase. For years, she had been nothing. Now she was something he could neither control nor silence. Later, in the staff lounge, Dr. Lyle Chen leaned close, speaking low. "I made copies of the toxicology report. If Monroe buries it, I still have proof." He slid a folder across the table, his hands trembling slightly. "But there is more. Security footage shows Dane visiting Ashford repeatedly, always alone for a few minutes, always leaving the jar behind." Clara's breath caught. The pieces that had lived only in her notebook now aligned with undeniable clarity. "Have you shown anyone?" "Not yet. If I do, Monroe will claim it is coincidence. Without Ashford conscious to confirm, it is our word against theirs." Before Clara could answer, the lounge door creaked open. Officer Keene stood there, posture rigid, his gaze narrowing on the folder between them. "What are you two plotting?" he asked, suspicion thick in his voice. "Cleaning schedules," Clara said evenly, sliding the folder into her bag. She forced her voice to remain calm, her face neutral. Keene's eyes lingered, then shifted away. "See that you stay in your place," he muttered before leaving. Chen exhaled sharply. "They are watching us now." That evening, Clara slipped outside during her break. The rain had left the courtyard damp, benches glistening under dim light. She sat with her bag beside her, the folder heavy as stone. The hospital loomed behind her, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Footsteps approached. Victor Dane emerged from the shadows, umbrella in hand, suit unwrinkled despite the rain. His smile was polished, but his eyes were sharp. "We keep meeting like this," he said softly. "Perhaps fate enjoys irony." Clara straightened. "You poisoned him." He tilted his head, amused. "Such bold words from someone who scrubs floors. Be careful, Ms. Jensen. Accusations without evidence are dangerous." "I have evidence," she said, her hand on the folder. His smile thinned. "Do you? Or do you have papers that men like Monroe can shred in minutes? Documents are fragile. Power is not." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Ashford's empire is dying whether his body survives or not. The market waits for no one. If he rises again, he will crush anyone who stood against him. Perhaps it is better for all if he does not rise." Clara felt her chest tighten. "You speak of lives as if they are numbers on a ledger." "They are," he replied smoothly. "And so are you, a cleaner who should have remained invisible. Do not mistake a moment of attention for permanence." He turned and walked away, his umbrella slicing through the rain. Clara sat frozen, her fingers trembling against the folder. His words dripped like poison of their own, but they could not erase the truth she carried. The next morning, Ashford opened his eyes fully for the first time in weeks. His voice was hoarse, weak, but audible. "What happened?" Monroe leaned over him, smooth and practiced. "A complicated illness. We intervened. You are recovering." Clara stood near the door, her cart beside her. Ashford's gaze drifted past Monroe, landing on her. His eyes narrowed faintly, recognition flickering. He whispered, "You." Monroe cut in sharply. "Rest, Mr. Ashford. Do not waste strength." But Clara saw the question burning in Ashford's eyes. She could not answer it. Not with Monroe looming, not with silence pressing her lips shut. She lowered her gaze, her hands clenched white around the mop handle. Later, Chen found her in the corridor. His voice shook with urgency. "We must tell him. If he knows, Dane cannot hide. But Monroe will never allow it." Clara looked at the patient chart pinned to the wall, at Ashford's fragile signature scrawled across the pages of his empire. Her voice was quiet, but certain. "Then, we find another way." That evening, when most of the staff had dispersed, Clara returned to Suite 12. Ashford's eyes were half open, weary but focused. She approached slowly, her hands trembling. "You are alive," she whispered, her words trembling with both relief and warning. "But you are not safe." His gaze sharpened faintly. His lips parted. "Why?" Before she could answer, the door opened. Monroe entered, his presence heavy, his voice cold. "Ms. Jensen, out." Clara froze, the unfinished truth suspended between them. She set her rag on the table, nodded once, and left the room. In the hallway, Chen waited. "Did you tell him?" "No," Clara whispered, her eyes burning. "But he asked. He knows something is wrong." Chen's hand tightened on her shoulder. "Then time is shorter than we thought." Together they walked the corridor, the weight of truth pressing heavier with each step. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the glass like a warning. The storm had returned, and with it, the reckoning they could no longer delay. The rain stopped before dawn, leaving the city washed clean, though inside the hospital the storm had not passed. Clara Jensen pushed her cart with mechanical rhythm, her eyes raw from sleeplessness. The folder of evidence weighed heavily in her bag, each page a weapon that could save or destroy. She felt the building itself tense, as if its walls understood the battle playing out inside them. In Suite 12, Raymond Ashford was awake. His body remained frail, his voice graveled by weakness, but his mind sharpened quickly, fed by years of survival in boardrooms where every word meant gain or loss. He listened as Dr. Everett Monroe recited clinical updates in tones too polished, too rehearsed. The billionaire's eyes narrowed. He sensed omission. Clara entered quietly, pushing her cart, her uniform a disguise that no longer fooled anyone. Ashford's gaze followed her. His lips parted. "You," he rasped. "Tell me." Monroe's head snapped toward her, his voice a blade. "Out!" But Ashford's weak hand lifted, trembling yet commanding. "Stay." The word, though hoarse, carried the authority of a man accustomed to obedience. The room froze. Monroe's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. Clara's pulse thundered. The choice she had rehearsed in silence now demanded action. She set her mop aside, stepped closer to the bed, and lowered her voice. "You were poisoned," she said steadily. "The cream. It contained thallium. Each visit from Victor Dane brought more. Your body told the truth when no one else would listen." Ashford's eyes widened, his breath quickening. He turned his head slightly toward Monroe. "Is this true?" Monroe's face stiffened. "Baseless accusation. She is a custodian, not a physician." Dr. Lyle Chen entered then, carrying a folder thick with reports. His voice, though quiet, carried weight. "It is true. I ran the tests. Toxicology confirmed it. Without Prussian blue, you would not be alive." He placed the folder on Ashford's bedside table. "Everything is documented." The silence that followed cracked with tension. Ashford's hand trembled as he reached for the folder, his fingers brushing the edge of truth. His gaze returned to Clara. "You saw what no one else did." Clara held his eyes. "I was invisible." "That is why I saw." The door opened abruptly. Officer Keene entered with two men in dark suits, badges gleaming. The FBI. Their presence shifted the air instantly. One agent spoke. "We are here for Victor Dane, and we will need statements." Monroe's face paled. "This is irregular. You cannot simply—" The agent cut him off. "We have evidence linking Dane to deliberate poisoning, corroborated by toxicology. Security footage confirms his visits and contact with the substance. We are acting on federal authority." Ashford exhaled slowly, his eyes closing with the weight of betrayal. "Dane," he whispered, the name dripping with years of rivalry. His hand tightened on the folder. "I trusted him once." The agents departed swiftly, their footsteps heavy, the sound of consequence echoing through the hall. Monroe remained by the wall, his authority reduced to silence. Chen stood near the bed, his posture straight, his voice steady. "He will live, Mr. Ashford, but the truth needed to be spoken." Ashford's eyes found Clara again. "What is your name?" Her throat tightened. No one had asked in this way for years, not as a form on a badge, but as recognition. "Clara Jensen." His lips shaped the name slowly, as if etching it into memory. "You saved my life." The words washed over her like light breaking through a storm. She nodded once. Fighting the swell of tears she refused to release here, in front of Monroe, in front of the walls that had dismissed her for so long. By evening, the news had spread beyond the hospital. Dane in custody. Ashford poisoned. Rumors of a custodian who had seen what 20 doctors missed. Cameras gathered outside, reporters clamoring for confirmation. Hospital administrators scrambled, their statements carefully crafted, their tone cautious. Yet inside the wards, whispers had already crowned Clara the unlikely heroine. She finished her shift quietly, wiping counters, emptying bins, as though the world had not tilted. But every step carried a new gravity. Nurses greeted her with nods. Interns offered small smiles. Even Officer Keene avoided her gaze, his silence no longer dismissal but uneasy respect. At home, Clara sat at her kitchen table with her children. Their eyes widened as she told them pieces of the story. "You saved a man's life," her son whispered, awe shining in his face. Her daughter leaned forward, her voice firm. "They cannot ignore you anymore." Clara smiled faintly. "Respect is not permanent, it is earned again and again. But yes, something has changed." Days later, Ashford requested her presence. She entered his office, nothing like the sterile suite where he had nearly died. Glass walls framed the skyline, sunlight pouring across polished wood. He was thinner, paler, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had built his empire. "Clara Jensen," he said, gesturing to a chair. "You saw what others would not. You refused silence when silence was easier. That is the kind of vision I built my life on." She sat cautiously, her hands folded in her lap. "I only did what had to be done." He studied her. "I want to do the same for you. Monroe will face his reckoning, Chen will have his place, and your knowledge deserves more than mops and silence. I will fund your return to study, your path to any field you choose. Chemistry, toxicology, medicine, whatever you wish." Clara's breath caught. The life she had buried years ago stirred like embers glowing back to flame. She thought of her father, of the textbooks she had clung to, of the years of invisibility endured. "And if I fail?" she whispered. Ashford's gaze sharpened. "Then you fail with your name known, with your worth undeniable. Failure is nothing compared to being unseen. Clara rose, her hand trembling slightly as she shook his. Then I will try. When she left his office, the city stretched before her, bright after days of storm. For the first time in years, she felt the ground firm beneath her, not because others had finally seen her, but because she had forced them to. In the reflection of the glass doors, she caught her own image. Uniform plain, hair pulled back tight, eyes steady. She did not look like a hero. She looked like herself. And that was enough. Clara Jensen walked into the light of the city, carrying not just the memory of what she had done, but the certainty of who she was.